Welcome back to Dark Horror Stories. In today's episode, I'm sharing 9 disturbing accounts from across New Jersey, stories from people who climbed into the wrong car and found something they were never meant to see. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Story 1. I've worked the late shift at a hospital in Camden for almost 11 years now, and I can tell you the parking deck at 3 in the morning is its own kind of country. The fluorescents up there hum at a pitch that gets behind your teeth. The concrete sweats in summer. In winter, every footstep echoes back at you twice, like the building itself is checking who's coming. The night I'm talking about was a Tuesday in March. I think it was March. It might have been late February. I remember the slush on the ramps, and I remember my coffee tasted like burnt plastic from the machine on the 4th floor. I'd worked a double because Renata Pavlik called out, and by the time I clocked out, my hands were shaking from caffeine and exhaustion in equal measure. My car back then was a silver Honda Civic, 2009, with a dent in the rear quarter panel from when my brother-in-law backed into a mailbox. I parked on level 4 every single shift. I was the kind of person who counted spaces from the elevator out of habit. 22 spaces always. So when I stepped out of the elevator that night and saw a silver Civic in space 22, I didn't even slow down. I had my keys out. I clicked the fob. I heard a chirp. The chirp didn't come from my car. It came from somewhere a level below me, faint, almost polite. I remember stopping with my hand on the door handle. The dent was on the wrong side. The little tree-shaped air freshener I kept on my mirror was missing. There was a child's car seat in the back, and I don't have children. I have never had children. I told myself I was tired. I told myself somebody else owned a Civic and parked on 4 sometimes, and the chirp had been a coincidence, an echo, the deck playing tricks. I almost laughed at myself out loud. That's the part I keep coming back to, how close I came to just opening the door and sitting down. Then I saw the driver's seat. Someone was already in it, not sitting up. Slumped forward against the steering wheel with their forehead pressed to the plastic, hair hanging down, shoulders too narrow, arms folded tight against the chest like they were cold. The window was up, the car was off. They weren't moving, but they weren't a body either. I knew the difference. I'd seen enough to know, because as I stood there frozen with my key still extended toward the lock, the person in the driver's seat slowly turned their head to look at me without lifting it from the wheel. Their forehead stayed glued to the steering wheel. Their neck rotated, just the neck, until one eye was looking at me through the curtain of hair. I want to be clear about this. I have replayed that moment 10,000 times. The face didn't lift. It pivoted, like something turning on a lazy Susan. I don't remember walking backwards. I remember the chirp again, that same polite chirp, coming from a level below me, calling me. I remember my actual car being on level 3, not 4. I had miscounted floors when I got out of the elevator. I had been about to get into a car that was not mine, parked in a space that was not mine, on a level I had never used. I took the stairs down. I didn't run. Running felt like it would tell whatever was up there that I knew. I walked with my hand pressed flat to the cold concrete wall, and when I reached my real car on level 3, I sat in it for 10 minutes with the doors locked before I trusted my hands to drive. The thing I haven't told anyone, not my husband, not the dispatcher I called the next day, not the security guard who watched the footage and shrugged because the footage showed me walking calmly to my own car and nothing else. No Civic on level 4, no figure, nothing, is what I found tucked under my windshield wiper when I got home. A parking stop. Level 4, space 22. Time stamped 3 minutes after I'd left work. My handwriting on the back, except I don't remember writing it. It said almost. I transferred to day shift the following month. I still count spaces from the elevator. I just don't park on 4 anymore, and when the deck is quiet enough to hear my own footsteps echo, I count them too, because some nights they don't match up. Story 2. My Uncle Barrick ran a bait, and tackle shop off Route 49 down in Cumberland County for almost 40 years. When he passed, my aunt asked if I'd drive down from Hoboken to help her clear out his pickup, a 1994 Ford Ranger, faded green, with a topper on the back that smelled permanently of night crawlers and old coffee. I was 28 between jobs, and I figured a weekend in the Pine Barrens would do me good. I'd loved that truck as a kid. Barrick used to let me ride in the bed on the dirt roads. I drove down on a Saturday afternoon in October. The light was already going amber by the time I hit the turnoff to his place. His house sat on 3 acres at the edge of the state forest, with the truck parked under a carport beside the shed. My aunt had left the keys in the visor and a note on the kitchen table saying she'd gone to her sister's in Vineland and would be back Sunday. The truck started on the second crank. I figured I'd take it down to the fire road behind the property, the one Barrick used to drive me on, just to see if everything ran right before I tried to flatbed it back north. Here's what I didn't expect. The truck I drove down that fire road wasn't the one I'd parked. I noticed it about half a mile in. The seat was wrong. Barrick was a tall man, and the bench had always been pushed all the way back to accommodate him. He was vain about that, said he'd rather drive with his knee in the dash than admit he wasn't 6'4" anymore. The seat I was sitting in was pushed forward, way forward, like someone shorter than me had been driving. I'd adjusted it before I got in. I remembered adjusting it. I remembered the click of the lever. I pulled over on the shoulder of the fire road and got out. The bed of the truck, which had been empty when I left the carport, now had a tarp in it, folded neatly, tucked into the wheel, well, like someone had taken pride in the fold. I tried to tell myself my aunt had left it there and I'd missed it. I tried to tell myself the seat had slid forward on its own when I hit a bump. The Pine Barrens out there are quiet in a way that isn't restful. The trees are short and scrubby, and they don't move much even when there's wind. You can hear a deer breathing from 100 yards off. I stood next to the open truck door and I couldn't hear anything at all. That's when I saw the dashboard. Barrick's dashboard had a small wooden crucifix glued to the vent. He'd had it there since I was a kid. I used to flick it as a joke and he'd swat my hand away. The crucifix on the dashboard in front of me was upside down. The glue was fresh. There were little white strands of it stretching where it had been recently pressed. I had been driving a different truck for the last half mile. I am as sure of that as I am of anything. I closed the door very gently and I started walking back toward the house, leaving the truck running on the shoulder. The fire road behind me went quiet in stages, like something was turning off the sounds one at a time. First the cicadas, then the wind in the pines, then my own footsteps, even though I was still walking. About a quarter mile from the carport, I heard the truck door open behind me, not the slam of someone getting in. The slow, considered open of someone getting out. I did not turn around. I have never been more certain of anything in my life than I was certain that turning around would end me. I kept walking. The footsteps that started behind me were not in time with mine. They were faster, then slower, then exactly synced, then absent. When I reached the carport, my aunt's other car, a Buick she rarely drove, was sitting there with the driver's door hanging open and the dome light on. I'd left it locked. I had the keys in my pocket. I checked. They were still in my pocket. I drove the Buick back to Hoboken that night. I didn't stop for gas until I was past Cherry Hill. The Ranger was found 3 days later, parked back under the carport, engine cold, tarp folded in the bed exactly the way I'd seen it. The crucifix on the dash was right side up again. My aunt sold the truck to a man in Millville for $400 and didn't ask questions when he brought it back 2 weeks later and left the keys in her mailbox with no note. I still don't know whose truck I drove down that fire road. I know it had my uncle's plates. I know it had his dent in the tailgate. I know the engine sounded the way I remembered. But I also know that when I think about that drive now, I can't picture my own hands on the wheel. I can picture hands. They just aren't mine. Story 3. I used to bartend at a place in Asbury Park, the kind of bar that closed at 2 but didn't actually empty out until almost 3. By the time I'd cashed out and helped Marisol Quintero wipe down the back tables, I'd usually be walking to my car around 3:30 in the morning. The lot we used was 3 blocks inland, on a side street near a row of boarded-up bungalows that the city kept saying it would renovate and never did. My car was a beige Toyota Corolla. There were probably 6,000 of them on the road in New Jersey. That's important because the night I'm telling you about in late September of what I want to say was 2019. It might have been 2020. The years all blur from that period. There were 2 beige Corollas in that lot. Mine had a Rutgers sticker on the back window. The other one didn't. That was the only difference I could see at first. I noticed the second Corolla from across the street. It was parked exactly where I usually parked, in the spot under the dead streetlight by the chain-link fence. My car was on the other side of the lot, near the dumpsters. I knew this because I could see my Rutgers sticker reflecting the headlights of a passing taxi. But the way the other Corolla was sitting there, exactly in my spot, exactly at my angle, with its front wheels turned slightly to the left the way mine always sat because the alignment was bad, it stopped me at the curb. The driver's side window was down. I hadn't left mine down. I never did. The neighborhood didn't reward it. A hand was hanging out of the open window, just hanging. Fingers loose, palm down. The arm was bare, pale in the streetlight, and from across the street I could see the little blue veins on the back of the wrist. I could see the watch. The watch was mine. I'm telling you this honestly. The watch was the digital Casio my dad gave me for my high school graduation, with the cracked face from when I dropped it on the bar 2 summers earlier. I knew that crack. I knew the way the 7 was half faded. I looked down at my own wrist. My watch was there, on me. Same crack, same faded 7. I want you to understand I stood at that curb for a long time, long enough that a stray cat came out from under a porch and sat watching me from across the street, long enough that the moisture from the bay rolled in and made the asphalt shine. The hand in the open window did not move. I crossed the street eventually. I had to. My car keys were in my hand and my brain had gone completely flat, the way it does when you've seen something that doesn't fit and you decide to just walk through it instead of around it. I gave the second Corolla a wide berth, maybe 10 feet, my eyes locked on that hanging arm. When I was directly across from it, the fingers twitched, not a wave, a little testing flex like someone checking a glove still fits. I started walking faster. I didn't run yet. I got to my own car, the real one with the Rutgers sticker, and I dropped my keys twice trying to get the door open. The whole time my back was to the other Corolla, and the whole time I knew, the way you know when someone is staring at you in a crowd, that the hand in the window was no longer hanging. It was lifted. It was pointing. I got in. I locked the doors. I started the engine and I pulled out of that lot without looking in the rearview mirror, and I drove home with both hands so tight on the wheel that I had marks across my palms in the morning. When I got home, I sat in my driveway for a few minutes catching my breath. Then I looked down at the passenger seat because something in my peripheral vision had been bothering me for the whole drive. There was a Casio watch on the passenger seat, cracked face, faded 7. I checked my wrist. My watch was still there. I had 2 of them now. I drove out to the marina the next morning and I threw both of them off the end of the pier. Not just the new one, both. I didn't want to ever wonder which was which. I bought a new watch at a CVS that afternoon, a cheap analog thing with a plastic band, and I haven't owned a digital watch since. I quit the bartending job a month later. I told my manager it was the commute. It wasn't the commute. Story 4. My grandfather lived out near High Point in Sussex County for the last 20 years of his life, in a little ranch house at the end of a gravel road that cut through state forest on both sides. I used to drive up from Trenton to visit him every other weekend, especially after my grandmother passed. He was stubborn about staying out there alone. He'd been a Newark cop for 30 years and he liked the quiet, he said. He liked that the only thing that woke him up was the deer. This was a few winters ago. I want to say February, because the snow was still hard-packed and the trees still had that black look they get when there's no leaves and no light. I'd driven up on a Friday night after work. The drive takes about 2 hours when the roads are clean. That night it took almost 3 because there'd been a squall up near Sparta and the plows hadn't been through. By the time I turned off the main road onto his gravel drive, it was past 10 o'clock. The drive is about a quarter-mile long, lined with hemlocks. He always left the porch light on for me. That night the porch light was off. I figured he'd gone to bed. He was 81 years old and he'd started going to bed at 9 sometimes. I parked next to his Bronco. He'd had that Bronco since 1989 and he'd never replace it. And I let myself in with my key. He was sitting in his chair by the wood stove, awake, reading the Louis L. Amer paperback. He looked up when I came in and he said, "You made good time." I told him about the squall. He nodded. He asked if I wanted coffee. I said no, I wanted to sleep. I'd had a long week. He said the guest room was made up. I went to bed. In the morning, I got up around 7 and I went out to my car to grab my overnight bag, which I'd forgotten in the trunk the night before. The snow had drifted up against the side of the house overnight, maybe 4 inches of fresh powder on top of the hard pack. My car was where I'd left it, beside the Bronco. There were no tire tracks leading to it. The drive behind me, all quarter-mile of it, was untouched snow. Pristine, not a track, not a footprint, nothing. I stood there in my grandfather's driveway holding my keys and I could not work out how I had gotten there. I remembered the drive. I remembered the squall. I remembered the headlights cutting through the hemlocks. I remembered turning off the gravel road. I remembered parking next to the Bronco. But the car wasn't the only thing without tracks. There were no tracks anywhere. No deer, no squirrel, no mailman. The driveway looked like a photograph of a driveway, like a place where time had not yet happened. I went back inside. My grandfather was making eggs. I asked him as casually as I could whether the plow had come through last night. He said no, the plow didn't come up the gravel road, that was on us to handle. He said he'd shovel later. He asked me how the drive up was. I told him about the squall again. He looked at me a little funny. He said, "You told me about the squall last night." I said, "Yes, I'm just saying it again." He went quiet for a second. Then he said, "You came in at 10 last night. I heard you. I heard the door, but I was already in bed. We didn't talk." I sat down at the kitchen table. I asked him if he was sure. He said he was sure. He'd been asleep by 9 like always. He'd heard the door and he'd heard somebody moving around in the living room for a few minutes, and then he'd heard the guest room door close. He hadn't gotten up because he figured it was me. I didn't tell him what I remembered. I didn't tell him about the conversation by the wood stove, the Louis L. Amer book, the offer of coffee. I didn't tell him because I could see, looking at him across that table, that he had not been the man I'd talked to the night before. We had a normal breakfast. I told myself I was tired and I'd dreamed the conversation. But I went back into the living room afterwards and I checked the chair by the wood stove, and the Louis L. Amer paperback was sitting on the side table with a bookmark 112 pages in. My grandfather hadn't read a Louis L. Amer book in years. His eyes were too far gone for paperback print. He read large print westerns from the library, and that's all he read. I left right after breakfast. I made an excuse about work. I drove down that quarter-mile gravel driveway and I watched in my rear view the whole way. And there were tire tracks behind me now, fresh ones. But the tracks I'd made coming in still weren't there. My grandfather passed about 8 months later. When my mother and I cleaned out the house, I found the Louis L. Amer paperback in a drawer in the guest room, not the living room, the guest room, with the bookmark moved to page 240. I don't know who finished it. I know it wasn't him. I don't go up to that part of Sussex County anymore. There's nothing for me there now. But sometimes when I'm driving at night and I see a porch light come on at the end of a long driveway, I think about who might be sitting by the wood stove, waiting to make good time. Story 5. I drove a tow truck for a small operation in Paterson for about 6 years. Most of the calls were what you'd expect: breakdowns on Route 80, repos in apartment complexes, the occasional accident on the Garden State. The dispatcher was a woman named Yolanda Brewster who'd been doing the job since the 80s. She knew every cop in 3 counties. She didn't spook easy. The call I'm telling you about came in around 2 in the morning on a Wednesday in July. A woman had called 911 saying her car had broken down on a stretch of Route 23 up near the Newfoundland Reservoir, and the state troopers had passed it to us. Yolanda gave me the location and the make, a red Subaru Outback. The caller's name was something like Kara, I think. I never got to confirm it. The drive up Route 23 at 2 in the morning is dark in a way that surprises people who think New Jersey is all turnpikes and strip malls. Once you get past Riverdale, the trees come right up to the shoulder and the road bends through them in long, slow curves. There's almost no shoulder lighting, just your high beams and the reflectors on the guardrail. I found the Subaru around mile marker 30-something. It was pulled half off the road, hazards blinking, parked at a slight angle like the driver had drifted to a stop rather than chosen a spot. I pulled my truck in front of it 10 yards up and I left my amber lights running. I got out with my flashlight and I walked back toward the Subaru. The driver's side was empty, the passenger side was empty, the keys were in the ignition, the engine was off. The dome light was on, which was strange because the door was closed. I could see the little switch in the doorframe was depressed. I figured the woman had walked off into the trees to relieve herself, which happens more often than you'd think on long stretches like that. I called out. I said, "Ma'am, this is the tow you called for." I waited. Nothing. I went back to my truck to call Yolanda. Before I could get the radio to my mouth, I heard a voice from the trees on the passenger side of the Subaru. It said, "I'm over here." The voice was a woman's voice. It was about 30 feet off the shoulder in the brush. I couldn't see her, but she sounded calm, a little tired, like someone who'd had a long night. I called back. "I see your car, ma'am. Come on out. I'll get you hooked up." She said, "Can you come here? I think I twisted my ankle." Now, I'd been doing this job for 6 years. I'd helped plenty of stranded drivers off the shoulder. There was nothing about that request that should have stopped me, but something about the way her voice sat in the trees, the way it didn't echo, the way it sounded like it was coming from exactly 30 feet away no matter which way I turned my head, that made me stand still on the gravel with my flashlight beam pointed at the brush and not move. I said, "Ma'am, I can't leave the truck. Can you make it out to the road?" There was a pause, a long one. Then she said in the exact same tone, "Can you come here? I think I twisted my ankle." Identical, word for word, same intonation, same little rasp on the word think. I started backing up toward my truck. My flashlight stayed pointed at the brush, but I couldn't see anything in there. No movement, no reflective eyes, just the trees standing up straight the way trees do when they don't care about you. The voice said it a third time. "Can you come here? I think I twisted my ankle." Then a fourth time, faster. Then a fifth, faster still, and that's when I realized it wasn't moving. It was 30 feet off the shoulder and it was just repeating like a tape loop someone had pressed play on. I got in my truck. I locked the doors. I called Yolanda on the radio and I told her I needed her to confirm the call had come from a real number. She put me on hold. While I was on hold, the dome light in the Subaru went out. The driver's side door of the Subaru opened by itself. I watched it open, a slow, deliberate swing until it was at maybe 45 degrees. Nobody got out, nobody got in. It just opened and stayed open, and the voice in the trees stopped repeating, and the woods went very, very quiet. Yolanda came back on the radio. She said the call had come from a cell phone. She said she'd called the number back while I was on hold, and a man had answered, and the man had said his wife had been missing since 2004. I left. I want to be clear that I left. I did not hook up the Subaru. I did not approach the open door. I did not call back into the trees. I drove back down Route 23 with my hands shaking on the wheel, and I told Yolanda over the radio that the troopers could send somebody else. The state police never found the car. They went out at dawn and they checked mile marker 30-something and the shoulder was empty. No Subaru, no skid marks, no footprints. The thing that bothers me, the thing I can't shake, is what I found in my truck cab the next morning when I went to start my shift. Tucked into the visor on the passenger side, where I keep my paperwork, there was a folded-up registration slip. Red Subaru Outback. The address was a town in Sussex County I'd never been to. The name on the registration was the name Yolanda had given me on the call. The expiration date was 2005. I quit driving tow about 6 months after that. I work in a warehouse now. I don't take calls in the dark anymore. Story 6. My sister and I share a car. We have for years. It's an old gray Subaru that used to belong to our mother, and we pass the keys back and forth like a relay baton depending on who needs it more that week. My sister, Devika, lives in Jersey City. I live in Bayonne. We trade off at a diner halfway between us when we need to swap. This is going to sound stupid, but the night I'm telling you about, we did the swap and I drove home in the wrong gray Subaru. I didn't know it at the time. The diner parking lot was full. There were probably 4 gray Subarus in there, easy. Devika had texted me she'd parked in the back row, and when I came out of the diner with the keys she'd handed me, I clicked the fob and a car chirped at me from the back row and I got in. The car started. The seat was where I'd expect it. The mirrors were where I'd expect them. The little crystal that Devika hangs from the rear view was hanging from the rear view. My sister and I have the same crystal because our mother gave each of us one when we got our licenses. I drove home. I want to tell you the drive was fine because mostly it was. The radio worked. The heat worked. The route was the same route I always took. But about halfway home, on a stretch of Route 440 where the streetlights are spaced too far apart, I glanced in the rear view to check my lane and I saw the back seat. There was a coat on the back seat. I don't own that coat. My sister doesn't own that coat. It was a long dark coat, folded once over the seat with the collar facing the driver's side. It was wet. I could see the moisture catching the streetlights as they passed, little wet patches spreading on the upholstery. It hadn't been raining. I told myself Devika had given somebody a ride. I told myself one of her friends had left a coat. I told myself 100 reasonable things in the 4 seconds it took me to look back at the road. When I looked in the rear view again, the coat was sitting up, not a person wearing the coat. The coat, sitting up, filled out at the shoulders like there was somebody inside it, but the collar was empty, just dark space where a head should be. The sleeves were resting on the legs of someone who wasn't there. I am telling you this exactly the way I saw it. The coat had a posture. It was leaned back, a little to the right, like a person taking up space comfortably. I did not pull over. I want to be honest about that, because I think people listening to this might wonder why. I did not pull over because I was on a stretch of road with no shoulder and no exits, and because my hands had gone so cold I wasn't sure I could open the door, and because some part of my brain that I didn't know I had told me very clearly that pulling over would be bad. I drove the rest of the way home looking only at the road. I could feel the coat behind me. I could feel it the way you feel someone reading over your shoulder. I had the radio off by then. I don't remember turning it off. I just remember the silence in the car and the sound of my own breathing, which I tried very hard to keep even. When I got to my building, I parked under the streetlight, the brightest spot in the lot. I did not turn around. I opened the driver's door, I got out, and I walked around to the passenger side and looked through the back window. The back seat was empty, no coat, no water stains. The crystal swung gently from the rear view where I'd left it. I checked the license plate. It was Devika's plate. The car was hers. The car had always been hers. I called her from the sidewalk and she picked up and she said yes. Of course it was her car. Why was I asking? Was something wrong? I asked her if she'd had anyone in the car that day. She said no. I asked her if she'd worn a long dark coat. She said no. I asked her one more thing, and I shouldn't have because I already knew the answer. I asked her if she'd ever seen anybody else in the back seat. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, once, on the Pulaski Skyway, about a year ago. I didn't tell you because I thought you'd say I was tired. We sold the car the next month. Neither of us drives a Subaru now. We both drive cars with cloth seats because the wet stains we couldn't explain, and yes, there were wet stains, my sister found them the next morning, wouldn't come out of the leather. Story 7. I work as an overnight cleaner for a company that handles a few of the office buildings in Princeton. It's solitary work. You go in around 11, you do your floor, you finish around 5 or 6 in the morning. The lots empty out before you arrive and fill up after you leave. Most nights you'll see one other car in the lot, the security guard, and that's it. The night this happened was in late October. I want to say 2 years ago, but it might have been 3. I'd worked the same building, a 4-story office complex off Route 1 for almost a year. The lot had assigned spots for the day people, and after hours we used whatever we wanted. I always parked in the same spot near the back exit because it put me closest to my supply closet. That night I came out around 5:15 in the morning. The sun wasn't up yet. The lot was lit by those tall sodium lamps that turn everything the color of weak tea. There was one other car in the lot, a black SUV, and it was parked next to mine. It hadn't been there when I'd come in. I knew this because the security guard, a man named Octavio Reyes, always pulled his car around to the front entrance for his shift, and there'd been no other vehicles when I'd arrived at 11. I figured somebody had pulled in for an emergency, slept in their car, whatever. People do that. It wasn't my business. I walked to my car, which was a white Ford Focus, and I clicked the fob. Both cars chirped. The white Ford Focus chirped. The black SUV chirped. I stood there in the parking lot at 5:15 in the morning with my keys in my hand, and I watched the lights flash on a vehicle that should not have been responding to my fob. The SUV's lights flashed twice, the way mine did, in the same rhythm. Then they flashed again on their own, a third time, a fourth, faster. I clicked the fob to lock. Both cars chirped lock. I unlocked, both unlocked. I want to tell you I left right then, but I didn't. I have been over and over this in my head, and I cannot explain why I walked over to the SUV. Curiosity, maybe, the slow, flat curiosity you get when you're tired and your brain isn't processing. I walked over to the SUV and I tried the door handle and it opened. The interior light came on. The interior of that SUV was the interior of my car. The same Diet Coke can in the cup holder. The same crumpled receipt from a Wawa on the passenger seat. The same little stuffed elephant my niece had left there months ago hanging from the gear shift. The same scratch on the steering wheel where I'd caught it with a key once, but it was a black SUV. Bigger, higher off the ground, different make, different model, different everything on the outside. I closed the door. I walked back to my Ford Focus very slowly. I got in. I sat there with my hands on the wheel. The black SUV's headlights came on. I had not touched my fob. The SUV's headlights came on full bright, pointed at the side of my car, and through the glare I could see the silhouette of somebody in the driver's seat. The silhouette had the same posture I have when I sit in my car. I sit a little hunched forward, with my left elbow on the door and my right hand at the bottom of the wheel. The silhouette in the SUV was sitting exactly that way. I started my car. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't get the key in on the first try. When the engine caught, the SUV's engine caught at the same time. When I put my car in reverse, the SUV's reverse lights came on. When I pulled out of the spot, the SUV pulled out. I drove out of that lot with the SUV behind me. It followed me to the exit. It followed me onto Route 1. It followed me for almost 2 miles. Then, at the light at Washington Road, it turned left when I went straight and it disappeared. I drove home and I sat in my driveway for an hour. The thing I haven't told anyone is that when I finally got out of my car that morning, my Diet Coke can was gone from the cup holder. The Wawa receipt was gone. The stuffed elephant was gone. Everything that had been in the SUV had been removed from my actual car. I bought a new stuffed elephant for my niece. I never told her the old one was missing. I quit the Princeton building 3 weeks later and asked to be transferred to a building in New Brunswick. I don't park next to other cars anymore if I can help it, and I never click my fob more than once. Story 8. My brother-in-law Cosimo runs a small landscaping company out of Toms River, and every fall he hires me on as part-time help to handle the leaf jobs out toward Forked River and Weirton. I was about 34 the year this happened, and I'd been doing the seasonal work with him for maybe 4 or 5 autumns running. We drove a white box truck with his company name on the side and a trailer hitched to the back with the mowers and blowers. This was a Saturday. We'd done a property out near a development that backed up to the wildlife management area. Big yard, lot of leaves, took us most of the day. By the time we packed up, it was getting dark, around 5:30, and Cosimo wanted to grab dinner before driving back. There was a diner he liked off Route 9 that we'd hit before. We unhooked the trailer in their gravel lot, locked it up, and went inside. We were maybe 40 minutes in the diner. I had a cheeseburger. Cosimo had a Reuben. He talked about his daughter's soccer team. The waitress was a woman named Eulalie who knew Cosimo by name. None of this matters except to tell you the night was completely ordinary up until we walked back out to the lot. The trailer was gone. Cosimo swore. He started looking around the lot like maybe somebody had moved it, which was insane because it was hitched to nothing and weighed about 800 pounds with the equipment in it. He got on the phone to call the cops. While he was on the phone, I noticed the box truck. It was parked where we'd parked it, same spot, but the box on the back was open. The roll-up door, which we always padlocked, was about 3 feet up. I could see into the dark interior of the box, and I could see something inside that should not have been inside. It was the trailer. The trailer that should have been hitched outside, separate, gone, was somehow inside the box of the truck. The truck box was not big enough to hold a trailer. The roll-up door was not tall enough for a trailer to fit through. But there it was, wedged in there at an angle, with the mowers and blowers stacked on top of it the way we always stacked them. I called Cosimo over. He hung up on the cops mid-sentence. He looked at the trailer in the box of the truck, and he didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "We didn't load that." I said, "I know we didn't load that." He said, "We couldn't load that. It wouldn't fit." We stood in the diner parking lot looking at something that couldn't fitting. The lot was almost empty. The streetlights were on. There were maybe 2 other cars in the lot, both diners. There was no one near the truck. Cosimo reached up to grab the bottom of the roll-up door to pull it down. Before he touched it, the door rolled itself the rest of the way up, smoothly, like it was on a motor. Our roll-up door has never had a motor. Inside the box, on top of the trailer and the mowers, was a man, sitting cross-legged, hands on his knees, watching us. I'm going to tell you what he looked like, and I'm going to do it once because I don't like thinking about it. He was wearing Cosimo's work clothes, the same blue Dickies, the same gray shirt with the company logo, the same brown work boots. His face was Cosimo's face, but it was wrong in a way I can't put into a single sentence. His mouth was a little too wide. His eyes didn't blink in time with each other. His hair was parted on the wrong side. He looked like someone had described Cosimo to a sculptor over the phone, and the sculptor had done their best. He smiled at us. I want to say he smiled like Cosimo, but it was Cosimo's smile. It was a smile that had been studied. Cosimo, the real Cosimo, made a noise next to me, a small noise like the air going out of him. I grabbed his arm and I started backing us up. We backed up across the gravel toward the diner, never taking our eyes off the man in the truck, and the man in the truck didn't move. He just sat there cross-legged, smiling, watching us back away. When we got to the diner door, Eulalie was watching us through the glass. She had a strange look on her face. She unlocked the door from the inside and let us in without saying anything. We sat in a booth for 2 hours. We did not look out the window. Eulalie brought us coffee we didn't drink. Around 8 o'clock, she said the truck was gone. We looked. It was. Trailer, equipment, man, all of it. The lot was empty. The truck turned up Monday morning at Cosimo's shop, parked neatly out front, locked. The trailer was hitched to the back. The equipment was inside the trailer. The roll-up door of the box was padlocked. Everything was in its place. Cosimo's spare key, which he kept in a magnetic case under the rear bumper, was missing. Cosimo sold the company within the year. He says it wasn't because of that night, but I know him and it was. He drives for UPS now. He won't take the brown route that goes past the diner. The thing I think about is that the man in the truck had been wearing Cosimo's work clothes, not clothes like Cosimo's. Cosimo's. Because 2 days after we got the truck back, Cosimo went to his closet and the gray work shirt he'd worn that Saturday, the one he'd taken off and thrown in the laundry, was missing. We never found it. Story 9. The last one I'll tell you takes place on a stretch of road in the Pine Barrens down near Chatsworth. I grew up about 20 minutes from there in a town called Tabernacle, and the woods around there are the kind that don't end. You can drive for an hour on a sand road and still be in the same patch of pines you started in. People who don't know the Barrens think they're a state forest. People who grew up there know there's something else. I was 19 the summer I'm telling you about. I just finished my freshman year at Rowan. My best friend Hattie Doolan and I had been planning a camping trip out near Apple Pie Hill for weeks. We loaded up her parents' Jeep Cherokee on a Friday afternoon in June, drove out past the cranberry bogs, and set up at a clearing we'd used 100 times growing up. The trip itself was uneventful. We hiked, we swam in a creek, we made a fire and sat up too late telling each other stories we already knew. On Sunday morning, we packed up around 10 and started back toward the sand road where we'd left the Jeep. The Jeep was parked at the end of the clearing path, where the path met the road. We could see it through the trees as we came up, the same green Cherokee with the rust spot on the rear quarter panel and Hattie's dad's bumper sticker about the Jersey Devil, the one that said I break 4 HIM. We loaded our gear into the back. We got in. Hattie started the engine. The Jeep started, but the Jeep didn't sound right. It had a different idle. Hattie noticed it first. She said, "Does this sound weird to you?" I said it sounded fine. She said, "It sounds higher than it usually does." She put it in drive and we started down the sand road. The road bends through the pines for about 3 miles before it hits pavement. It's a road I'd been on probably 100 times in my life. I knew every turn. I knew where the puddles formed in the spring. I knew the dead tree that leaned over the road at mile 2. We drove for about 10 minutes. The dead tree was not there. I want to tell you this carefully because it's the part that still wakes me up. The dead tree had been at mile 2 for as long as I'd been alive. My father had pointed it out to me when I was a kid. It was a big lightning-struck pitch pine, gray and bare, leaning at a 60-degree angle over the road, held up by the trees on the other side. It was a landmark. It was the way we knew we were halfway to the pavement. The road we were driving had no dead tree. The road we were driving had pines on both sides, and those pines were the right pines, but the dead tree was just gone. The road was longer, too. I checked the odometer. We'd gone 4 miles already, and we were still in the pines. Hattie said, "Are we on the wrong road?" I said, "There's no wrong road. This is the only road out." She kept driving. The pines kept going. The odometer climbed to 5 miles, then 6. The light through the trees was wrong. It was mid-morning. The sun should have been on our right side because the road ran east. The light coming through the trees was coming from in front of us, low and amber, like late afternoon. Hattie pulled over. She turned the engine off, and the silence that came in was the kind of silence I had only heard once before in my life, when I was 8 years old and had gotten lost in those same woods for almost an hour. It was a silence with weight to it. It pressed against the windows. I said, "Let's just keep driving. We'll hit pavement eventually." Hattie said, "I want to check something." She got out of the Jeep. I got out too. She walked around to the back of the Jeep and she looked at the bumper. The bumper sticker was missing, not faded, not peeled, gone. The bumper was clean, like it had been wiped down recently. There was no residue, no glue, no shape of where the sticker had been. The rust spot was still on the rear quarter panel. The plates were still her parents' plates, but the bumper sticker that her father had put on that Jeep in 1998 was simply not there. Hattie made a small sound. She walked back around to the driver's side. She opened the door. She looked inside. She said very quietly, "My keys are different." I came around. The keys in the ignition were her keys. Same Jeep keys, same little plastic fob, same keychain, a keychain her grandmother had given her with the letter H on it. But the H was on the wrong side. It was reversed, like a mirror image. The H was a perfect H, but a backwards one, and Hattie had been carrying that keychain since she was 12, and she knew which side the H was on. We got back in. We had nowhere else to go. Hattie started the engine, and the engine started, and that wrong-pitch idle was louder now, almost a hum, almost a voice. I tried not to listen for words in it. I couldn't help it. I listened for words in it the whole rest of the drive. We drove for another 12 miles. The road I knew was 3 miles long. We drove for 12, and then the pines opened up, and we were on pavement, and the pavement was Route 532, which it should have been. We pulled over at the first gas station we found in Chatsworth, and we sat in the parking lot for 40 minutes without talking. When we finally got out and looked at the Jeep in the daylight, the bumper sticker was back. The keychain H was facing the right way. The idle was normal. The odometer read the right number of miles for the trip we'd planned. We never told her parents. We didn't know how. We'd de-driven their Jeep into the Pine Barrens, and we'd driven a different Jeep out, and then we'd parked, and the original Jeep had come back to us. Hattie moved to Oregon after college. I think part of it was that. I think part of it was that she didn't want to drive through the Barrens to visit family in Atlantic City anymore. We still talk on the phone. We don't talk about that morning. Once a few years ago, she called me late at night and asked me a single question. She asked me what color the inside of the Jeep had been. I said the same as always, tan upholstery. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Mine was gray." We hung up. We haven't talked about it since. I still drive through the Barrens sometimes when I visit my mother. I do not stop. I do not pull over. I do not look at landmarks too closely because I am afraid of what I'll find missing, and I am more afraid of what I'll find in their place. Thanks for watching. If any of these stories got under your skin, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let me know in the comments which one unsettled you most, and tag a friend who shouldn't be left alone with their car keys tonight. Until next time, stay safe out there and double-check the plates before you turn the engine over.